we have at headquarters what we call We Care. It's a little red wagon. We're filling it with all kinds of goodies. We are here to support the Santa Rita Food Bank. We are collecting this month dry goods and canned goods. So bring your donations by to headquarters. Santa Rita right now could really use your help. Our next program is January 14th. We will be back here. It is on Children Action Alliance. And so supporting the children, I know I can see a couple grandfathers and grandmothers, plus some great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers here. So we need to be advocates for our children. So come back on the 14th in January and see what we can do working together. With that, I would like to introduce Paul McQuarrie. He is our VP of Programs. Paul, would you introduce our guests?
Okay, I will. Try. This is about the Scenic Santa Ritas. It's a group that was started in 1996 in Sonora, okay, to protect the Santa Rita Mountains and the environment and the wildlife from degradation from mining. It was incorporated and the name was changed to the Scenic SSSR, Save the Scenic Santa Ritas, in late 1996. So it's been a while, right? We're going to have 3 speakers. First is Steve Brown, who's going to be there. He's the co-president of the organization. He grew up on a ranch in the Santa Ritas. He now lives in Tucson. His career includes developmental coordinator of Physicians for Human Rights, which won a Nobel Prize. He's an educator and an author. Our next speaker will be John Cosma. Got it right? John was 5 years he was a naval officer in the during Vietnam. He lived in Burbank 37 years and moved to Quail Creek. He's been married for 54 years to his wife, and he joined SSSR in 2011. He was also on the Green Valley Council Environmental Committee, and he was a chairman for 4 years of that, okay? The other person who's going to be speaking is Robert Gay. He was in architectural school in Berkeley, California in the 60s. He's primarily an architect and a recovering builder. And he's from the east side of Santa Rita's in Patagonia. He's part of the Patagonia Resource Alliance, right? And he will present the Copper World rendering of the Green Valley and the north sides of the Santa Ritas. So those are the people that are going to be presenting.
I hope I can project, and I hope you can hear. So, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for gathering today. So in a moment I'll share one brief story of the road that brought me to this time and place.
Watch your foot.
The Santa Rita Mountains had cradled members of my family since my grandfather first came to the Sonoran Desert in 1893. And I serve on the board of directors of Save the Scenic Santa Ritas because I hope my grandchildren's grandchildren will also be able to experience the songbirds, the Santa Ritas, and all their magnificence, the storms with their cascading waters, the rainbows that follow, just as generations all the way back to historic times have done. So here's a story. As you've heard, I was born back in the 1940s, grew up on a ranch on Box Canyon Road in the Santa Ritas, the Santa Rita Ranch. I was the youngest of 4 siblings. Spent a lot of time outdoors, didn't have a whole lot of supervision. And I went to the Continental School when it was a 3-room schoolhouse, along with my 3 siblings. There were 5 children in my 8th grade graduating class. So, in the 8 years that I attended Continental School, we only had one snow day, which was in 1958, and that was the year of the big November 18th snowstorm, the anniversary of which we recognize this coming week. The day that storm arrived was the last day of our fall roundup, the day after shipping day, the culmination of the ranch year. That afternoon, as we followed the last cattle on horseback back to the last pasture, my father looked at the western sky and mused, "I think we're going to get a storm." The next morning when we woke up, several feet of snow blanketed the ranch headquarters. 3 boys my age perished that night up in the mountains we loved. That was the only time I ever witnessed my father cry. He felt like he'd lost his children in the mountains that we all loved. All the ranchers in the mountains, whatever their differences, felt the same way as they came together the following weeks and searched in vain. Somehow, in ways far beyond our capacity to understand, the Santa Rita Mountains bring people together in good times and hard times, for family picnics, for bird watching, but also for memorials and for somber times. And that's why we're here today. So before I pass the microphone, such as it is, along to my colleagues, I'd like to propose a moment of silence to honor those boys from 1958 and all the generations of families whose journeys have been shaped by these mountains. So just a moment of silence. Thank you. I honor their memories as together, in community, we learn from each other. And together, we envision a future that will preserve these mountains for all our children, all our grandchildren, for generations to come. So I'm going to pass the presentation along to the gentleman who put it together and really celebrate and praise the job that they did. But thank you again for welcoming me to your community.
But basically, the presentation this afternoon is on the Rosemont Copper World Complex. You may be familiar with the Rosemont operation that has been proposed for the last 10 plus years. And they also, in March of 2021, announced the additional claims for finding of copper on the western side of the ridge. And that's when they talked about Copper World. And we'll talk about it in a few minutes. But when Judge Soto made his rendering in 2017, the decision, I should say, that shut down the Rosemont mine, that's when Rosemont, or Hudbay at the time, decided to go back to the drawing boards. And then when the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in May of this year upheld Judge Soto's decision from 2017, that's when they announced what they call the Copper World Complex, which is a combination of both the old Rosemont and the newer Copper World, which is going to straddle both sides of the Santa Ritas. And we'll talk about that in a few moments, okay? And, you know, obviously, why are we here today is, again, community information. But for those who can read the fine print in the upper left-hand corner, there are some places that should never be mined. Excuse me, the Santa Rita Mountains are one of them. Who are we? Save the Scenic Santa Ritas, as Phil had indicated, is a volunteer-based 501(c) out of Tucson, Arizona, formed in 1996, and we only have one paid, partially paid employee. Everybody else is a volunteer, and that includes the board members and the advisory committee. Who are they? Hudbay, as you may have read in the press, is a Canadian-based mining organization with operations both in North and South America. They purchased the Rosemont copper from Augusta in 2014, and we just note that Hudbay has a record of conflicts with indigenous communities, especially South America. But again, we are here today to present what I hope will be an impartial presentation. The Rosemont Copper World Complex will straddle both sides of the Santa Ritas. Here's the original Rosemont pit here, as you may see, and this is where they were going to dump all their tailings, and this is the Copper World Complex. And we'll have more detail, you'll see more detailed maps on that going forward. Here again is another presentation where you have the Rosemont pit, and then you have their holdings here on the western side. And you will see this F shape, and that's a very significant situation, because during the latter part of the presentation, we will talk about the fact that they're trying to acquire more state land to give them a bigger footprint here on the western side. Hudbay intended to first develop the Rosemont mine, and again, even during the first 16 years of what's called Phase 1, that's what they intended to do. But that Copper World mine was basically on the western side of the Santa Ritas, which had been visible from Patagonia and Sonoita. This is a rendering. This comes from the days of Augusta, which shows what their property holdings were. Here's the Rosemont pit. Here's the Broad Top pit, which is still on the eastern side of the ridge. And then here is their original Copper World. This is the ridge line going up through the area. And I draw your attention to that now because here's that same Rosemont pit. Here is their initial holdings that Augusta had in 2014, and here's all their new acquisitions. So they basically now, they have added about another 1,200 acres to what they had from 2014. And it's all been basically on the western side. And as I had mentioned earlier, the federal court in Tucson basically invalidated the record of decision that the Forest Service had done in granting them their record of decision to proceed, and that basically sent it back to the Forest Service and the Wildlife Service. And then, as I had indicated down at the bottom, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals this past May upheld the district court ruling. So the only alternative from this point would be the Supreme Court if they wanted to take it that far. I will note that after the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, Hudbay made an appeal for a rehearing, but it is interesting that the Department of Justice, which represented the Forest Service, was not part of that rehearing request. So, this is facts. And again, this is what's basically going on up there now. It's all their private land, and what they're doing is different roadways and also drilling pit locations. And you can't see it from this side, but again, when Robert gets to it on his renderings, they intend to drop the ridge line a significant amount of height. In other words, they're going to basically try to smooth out, if you want to call it that, a lot of the canyons and washes that exist up there right now. The original Rosemont proposal, which is what we had in the 2018-2019 time period, was going to be for 19 years mine life. The new combined Rosemont Copper World Complex is now talking a 44-year mine life. So basically more than double. The first 16 years of the Copper World Rosemont Complex is going to be basically all on the western side. And that's what they consider the first 16 years. And there's going to be 7 open pits involved. And they will, in fact, still be taking copper ore from the Rosemont pit. And as you may have seen in the article that the Green Valley News did in November, based upon our first presentation, and then they also did one in June, which you may want to go take a look at, June 10th, if I recall correctly. And what they did is they gave, after the preliminary economic analysis was released, they sent about a dozen questions to Rosemont to be answered, or Hudbay. And Hudbay did that, and that's what they published in that June article. The first question, by the way, dealt with water. which is what we'll get to in a little bit. And there's going to be, as I indicated, 7 pits involved, and the Peach, Elgin, and Copper World pits are going to be on the western side. And again, I have another map later on, I'll give you a better rendering. And then Broad Top, Butte, and Rosemont are all going to be on the eastern side of the Santa Rita Ridge. And some of those pits are going to be relatively shallow, 430 feet. Other ones are going to be in the neighborhood, basically a half a mile, 2,300 feet deep. And if they proceed to phase 2, which we'll talk about in a second, I know I'm going to say that several times today, that's the one that's basically almost 1.5 miles long and a half a mile deep. And it's going to stay that way. And one of the other things that concerns us in some of these deeper pits is you get to what's called a pit wake. In other words, the pit depth is below the water line. So after a while, when they stop mining, what they do in the big mines right now, even like Freeport, Sarita, to the west here, they are dewatering the mining pit as they proceed. But then obviously after they cease operations, they don't have the need to dewater. And that's when the pit wake results. And of course, you're familiar, I think, it's not just mosquitoes, but what can happen to let me just adjust this a little bit. What can happen to stagnant water that sits around for years? Now there will be new inflow and there will be evaporation, but obviously, as you know, the concentration of the solids will increase during that time. And there are a series of several permits that are required. Certificate of Environmental Compatibility from the Arizona Corporation Commission. That's somewhat of a, I won't say an easy thing to do, but it's almost a stamped approval. And then from the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, they have to get an air quality permit, an aquifer protection permit, and then also a general elimination system. From the Arizona, oh, by the way, they have already filed their air quality permit with the state, and that is available on the website if you go to the state, or if you go to the the Scenic Santa Ritas website, we'll make sure that we have that posted for you too. It's basically almost a 90-page document that is going to the state to indicate what the situation here is. One of the things, and again, I personally haven't read it yet, I have seen it, is that concerns us is that the air permit and the aquifer protection permit, in our perspective, should be brand new permits. What they have in mind is simply to put in an amended permit request for what they did when the Rosemont project was approved, goes better than 5 to 7 years ago. The second permit that is of key importance is the aquifer protection permit, and that is again indicating from the Department of Environmental Quality. Their literature says that they have filed it. I personally have not been able to find it on the website, and I do have the name of an individual in the Department of Environmental Quality up in Phoenix, and this weekend I'm going to be sending her an email asking her, one, is it filed? And secondly, if so, how do I find it on your website so we can see the detailed information?
John, we do have that permit in our hands. It's 3,000 pages long, so it's really good reading.
Because one of the things that's extremely important from our perspective and as a citizen's perspective in an aquifer protection permit is they are required at key locations to put in what's called point of compliance wells. These are wells that when they're when the wells first go in, they will sample the water as to what its contents are. And then as the mine continues operations, there will be requirements for them to periodically resample the water. And that's where you're going to find the first indications of contamination or other chemistry changes that are taking place in the water. So the location of those point of compliance wells are very significant.
Is the aquifer protection permit issued, or is it the application that is?
It's the application that is in. Neither of them, to my knowledge, and I think Stan would agree, neither of them have been approved yet, because one of the other things that is involved in both of those permits is there's supposed to be a public hearing period in which you can comment on the content of their proposal. And I have not seen a posting from the state yet on either of those, and that's, again, the public comment period. Again, I appreciate the information from the audience. If you feel you really have a key point, please raise your hand. Otherwise, if we can just hold on. But yes, ma'am.
Yes, I was wondering, how far down do these wells sample? I mean, do they actually go to the point of compliance wells? Do they actually go down to the full depth of the aquifer?
I would say normally not. In other words, I haven't seen their application yet, but typically they should be at least several hundred feet in order to get below the water table. And being on the ridge line there, it's not quite the same as we are here in the valley. But some of the community water, as you may know, there are 6 water providers in Green Valley. And it's not like Tucson or the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. But some of those 6 community providers, their wells are in excess of 1,000 feet. So, it is significant. But anyways, that's the 2 permits that have to come from environmental quality. The third, which is they're talking about doing as an amended change, but we'll see how that goes, is the permit from the Department of Water Resources in order to pump groundwater. In other words, we are in what is called an active management area. And in an active management area, anybody who pumps, I think it's more than like 300 gallons a year, has to send a report to the state how much that well is extracting from water. And the state also assigns them a 55 number. So, if you belong to community water, for example, you can always ask them what their 55 numbers are for their wells. And you can go to the Department of Water Resources website and see what their report was for last year. But anyways, water is one of the key provisions, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. There is also, with the town of Santa Rita, and we'll talk about this also, is that there's a right-of-way permit on the primary route to and from the mine is going to be Santa Rita Road. And if you're not familiar with that, that is the road basically almost directly south of the old pecan store. You know where the big building is that they built for storage? That's where Santa Rita Road runs. And that's going to be the main road up to the mine and back to the mine, which also means that all the truck traffic that's involved is going to be on either Nogales Highway or Santa Rita Road. Things to keep in mind. But this right-of-way permit, about halfway up Santa Rita Road, where they want to run their pipeline, there's about 4 acres that belongs to the town of Santa Rita. So they have, back in 2013, got a license from the town of Santa Rita in order to do that. But part of that licensing agreement is that the town requires them to recharge 105% of the water they extract from their well field in the town of Santa Rita. And I have a map at the end which will show you where that recharge has to occur. And in the presentation, we'll also talk about where are they going to get the water. Again, this is that rendering where the western operations are going to be. And this is, again, what is referred to as the F. And it's along these areas that they intend to dump their tailings. During the first 16 years, they are not going to do dry stack tailings like Rosemont was going to do on the eastern side. Rather, this is going to be a conventional copper oxide and copper sulfate operation, and there's going to be tailings involved. What the tailings really are is from the sulfate, from the liquidation process. There's a sludge that is given off. And it's not really a sludge, it's more like a slurry, if you're familiar with ceramics. And this slurry is pumped to these tailing areas, and there's a tailings pond that ends up resulting on the top. And what they're doing is they're looking for evaporation. And as that evaporation occurs, the tailings are a very fine, granular type of sand. There is no tensile strength to it whatsoever. And anyways, they then dry out an area, and they get a bulldozer, and they build the tailing walls higher, and then they reflood that, and they just continue to do that during the course of the operations. But I won't say necessarily unfortunately, this is where their equipment is going to be gone. This is their equipment area, all the concentrators, their rock pulverizers, separation tanks, etc., are all in that area there. This land here belongs to the Bureau of BLM. They are going to have, from this operations point here, a 1,700-foot pipeline that runs underneath the Bureau of Land Management area in order to have the tailings built up in that area over there.
Could you please the
Yeah,
white line?
there is the current limestone mine right there. So again, this is basically, this is south looking north, would be another way to perceive it.
Where's the ridge line?
What's that? And the ridge line runs right along here. There's the ridge line. This is going to be over on the eastern side, and this is the western side. And again, that's the white limestone line. You will see, and Robert will show it in his renderings, you're going to see that they're going to have tailings in front of the white limestone mine. And it shows a little bit, I think it's on another slide, but I'll go ahead and mention it now. Right now, Santa Rita Road runs through where they're going to put their tailings. So part of the project is going to involve moving Santa Rita Road to the back side of the tailings so they have access to the limestone mine. And basically, in the second phase, which is the 17th to 44th year, that's when they're going to do the major expansion of the Rosemont pit. And that, what they really want to do in 16 years is learn how to file a permit to use federal land, forest land. We're getting to the 1872 mining permit, or mining law, and on that, you have to have a permit in order to put your tailings or other material on your claim area. And that's what they're going to do, and as I say, it's going to be 16 years. This is some of the things that we're basically just highlighting here. There's basically 20-year plus estimated mine life. There's about 995 acres of private land involved. There's 75 acres of state trust land involved. And if they get what they want on the eastern side, there's going to be about 3,300 acres of BLM and Forest Service land. And the Rosemont pit, as I'd indicated earlier, is going to be in the neighborhood of 1,800 to 2,900 feet deep. And it will be on the Scenic Santa Rita, I call it the Scenic Santa Rita, Scenic Highway 83. On that side, the Rosemont pit will be totally visible, because as Robert will show you, and I have some other renderings, basically the Rosemont pit is going to be dug into the side of the mountain with the crest being almost just a couple hundred yards over the top of the ridge line. Here is the Rosemont pit, and these are all of the tailings that are going to be over on the Highway 83 side. So that's going to be a significant operation. And again, that's going to be better than 20-year mine life. And now getting back to our side, okay, one of the things that's of concern to us, and HUD Bay is in discussions with the Pima County Flood Control District, because some of the things that there's natural washes up there, which have during the rainy season significant water flow. And what they're doing is just filling those washes and using it as part of their roadway. So the question is, that ends up reducing the flow coming down the side of the mountain. And flow coming down the side of the mountain is one of the major factors in recharging the aquifer. So it's not just a contamination problem, but it's also to what degree are they going to tentatively possibly reduce the recharge rate. Because water coming off the side of the mountains, that's true both along the entire length of the Santa Ritas and also the Santa Rita Mountains to the west. There are major factors in recharge for our aquifer here. And here's some of the concerns. Obviously, the quality and degradation, dust situation, I'm not sure. And by the way, Freeport-McMoRan, from my experience, is a very responsible organization. And obviously, a couple of years ago, they had a very unfortunate dust incident that you may remember. But the one thing they did do, and I'm not sure if it was to your personal satisfaction or not, they hired crews to come in and clean off the dust on individual properties that were owned and affected by it. And just for your own information, I know the tailings, as I had indicated, are very fine granular sand. And they do stack them in ice. Okay. What they do is they put magnesium chloride, which is like a glue that goes over the top of those tailings to help during high winds to prevent the sand from blowing away. Unfortunately, magnesium chloride is soluble. So when it rains, you lose the effect. And if you have a major windstorm, either during or right after a major windstorm, your protection on the tailings are gone, and that's where the dust occurs from. And then there's going to be the noise and light situation, and we'd have some renderings on that or information, but I'm in Quill Creek. By the Flight of the Eagle, we're about 8 miles away. So we're probably not going to hear the blasting, but we're going to definitely see the lights. Now, they are still under the Pima County dark skies requirements, which means their lights have to go downwards, but you're still going to see the reflection. And then there, in terms of the scenic vistas, traffic hazards potential, because one of the things in that June Green Valley News article, they mentioned about traffic and also what kind of operation is going to occur. Previously, Rosemont was going to be copper sulfate. That's the primary ore, by the way, up here. There are two types of copper ore. One is copper oxide, and that is done through a heap leach process. In essence, you put a mild acid on it. The copper goes into solution. You collect that solution, and then through electrolyning, okay, you get copper plates. The other ore is copper sulfide. And what was traditionally going to happen, and by the way, copper sulfide in both sides of the ridge is more than 80 to 85% of the ore. What they normally would do is they would take the ore out of the ground, and the copper content, by the way, both of these mines here, plus the other mines in Green Valley, are what are called low-grade mines. The copper content is basically less than 1%. The copper content in these mines that Hudbay is talking about is 0.4 to 0.35. So they have to move lots of tons of dirt and refine lots of tons of dirt in order to get the copper. But what they do is they take the copper ore, they crush it into very fine particles, and then they go through a flotation process. And at that point, the copper molecules separate from their material, and what comes off the flotation device is those slurries that we talked about. But they also capture the copper, and it's an enhanced percentage. And they make little tiny pellets out of it. And the copper content in that case is about 0.28, 25 to 0.28% copper. And that's normally what gets sent off to the smelters. Under the old Rosemont project, you may remember Rosemont does not, or Hudbay, does not have any smelters anywhere. I think they may have one in Peru, right, Stan?
There's a smelter at Morenci in Arizona.
Yeah, but that's not theirs.
Oh.
That belongs to Freeport-McMoRan. But basically what they were going to do is take that copper sulfide at nuggets and ship it off to China and have them do the refining, get the copper, and then sell it back to this country. What they're talking about now is a totally different process. They're going to take the copper oxide, as we talked about, with a heap leach pad. That's a given. That isn't changing. But the copper sulfide, they're going to crush it, and they're going to put a very, very fine particles, by the way. And again, they're going to put it in a sulfuric acid bath, if you want to call it, or irrigate it with sulfuric acid and collect the solution. And that's going to go into an electro-winding tank also. So they will be able to get copper ingots. So they're no longer going to be exporting copper concentrate, but they're going to have actual finished ingots. And you may have seen them in other, if you're familiar with it. The thing that they did not indicate in that June article to the Green Valley News, one of the byproducts of that is sulfuric acid. So that mining operation is going to end up, and Stan can touch base on this if you wish, they're going to end up with a lot more sulfuric acid. And they intend to basically sell it. And that's when you're going to end up with sulfuric acid tankers coming down Santa Rita Road, going on to Nogales or Pima Mine Road. Now, transporting of sulfuric acid is a known given process. I'm not trying to say that, it's a new thing. It's been going on for decades. But when one of those tanker trucks all of a sudden has an accident, and you spill thousands of gallons of sulfuric acid into a wash or something like that, now you got a potential contamination situation. But anyways, traffic, and then we have loss of habitat to the individuals, potential decreased property values. You may have seen the article in the Green Valley News about a month ago or so, where there was an individual who owned a piece of property up there for a number of years. Basically, he gave in and he sold his property to Rosemont because he didn't want to stay there when all the tailings were going to be ensuing. And then there's impact to tourism. To our knowledge right now, and Stan can talk to this too, because he's a birder, Madeira Canyon will not be directly impacted. But you never really know until it comes to be. And the size of the operation they're talking about over there is appreciable. And then there's the loss of recreational and open space, the area for the mine, and even after the mine is closed, they're going to fence it and not have access. And the reason is for public safety. They don't want somebody falling into one of those pits. And then there's also the potential destruction of over 100 archaeological sites. And I personally have never visited Helvetia, which is the old pick and shovel mining village that existed up there in the late 1800s. And that was for 19 years. So that ends up being about 15,000 acre feet over that 19-year mine life. With the 44-year mine life of Copper World, they're talking about 9,600 acre feet the first 16 years, and then 13,000 acre feet during the second portion. The total number averages out over the 44 years to about 13,000 acre feet. Over 44 years, they're talking over 500,000 acre feet of water. What that boils down to is that 13,000 acre feet a year, water providers like the Arizona Department of Water Resources indicate there's between 2.5 to 3 individuals per household. But again, the 13,000 acre feet, approximately 41,000 households. All the water will be pumped from that mine well field that they have, and their well field exists basically just north of Santa Rita Road. I don't know if you know where the Green Valley Gardeners have their complex, but basically that's where the general area of their well fields are, and that's going to be along a pipeline that is going to exist, and most of it's going to be visible going up the side of the mountain. And in addition to that, there's going to be over 100-foot tall power lines going up the side of the mountain. They're basically going to put a substation up there, is what they've asked DEP to do, okay? HUD claims, especially per that license agreement with the town of Santa Rita, that they are going to replace all the water they use. But the question becomes, rough math, where are they going to get 10,000, once they go into operations, where are they going to get 10,000 acre feet of water a year? And
When you're quoting us these numbers, are you talking about only this basin, this range shed area, this Sarita Aquifer, Green Valley, or are you also talking about the east side?
no, we're talking the west side only.
Thank you.
As you may know, Asarco owned this Copper World property for a number of years. Those copper deposits up there, of which there are 3 major ones, is nothing new. They've been known for decades. What Asarco was wanting to do, and even with the Rosemont pit, they were going to develop it, but the problem is they could not get the water on the eastern side of the Santa Ritas. The water availability on the eastern side is significantly different than the western side. In essence, we, being in Green Valley, are in that trough, if you want to call it that, between the Santa Ritas and the Santa Mountains. And that's what gives us our aquifer, which is over 1,000 feet deep.
So they're using our aquifer to run the entire operation.
They're using
I understand why.
our aquifer to run the entire operation. Now, we'll talk about it in a few minutes. The 1980 Groundwater Act, okay, when the 1980 Groundwater Act was put together, and it, by the way, passed in the Arizona Senate and Legislature by a very small margin, just a couple votes for, with a large percentage against. But there were 3 major entities that complained or had concerns with that Groundwater Act 1980. Cattlemen, farmers, and miners. So in the 1980 Groundwater Act, they are basically, they're not exempt, but they're given many privileges which other individuals are not entitled to. So, just something to be aware of. And they're not guaranteed any long-term supply. There are 2 from the 2015, 2018 time period, there are two major recharge projects that are coming to be in Green Valley. One of them is the Pecan Groves, which is known as a ground savings facility. And in the latter part of 2020, they basically completed a 36-inch pipeline all the way from the terminus on the west side of I-19 across their fields and down. So they are now putting about 10,000 acre-feet a year of tap water on their northern groves. And as such, they are not taking 10,000 feet of groundwater anymore. Hud Bay, which is in conjunction with Community Water, they have what's called Project Renews, which was supposed to be, is the same thing. Project Renews has a license to build a recharge basin just south of Walmart. If you know the intersection of Nogales Highway as it turns north and Old Nogales Highway, basically their recharge basin is going to be just north of the current Pima Mine sanitation facility. The only difficulty is that that recharge basin is only licensed for 3,000 acre-feet a year. If you're going to use 10,000 acre-feet and bring 10,000 acre-feet down here, where are you going to put it? Also, you may have noticed in that June article, Hud Bay talked about the 42,000 acre-feet of water that they put up in the marina area. That does them no good. There is a difference between wet water and paper water. And there is no infrastructure where they can extract that from what they pumped in and now bring it south. And I have that on very good authority. One of the chief hydrologists of one of our major water suppliers in Tucson. So they talk about it. Also, as you may know, the aquifer flows from south to north. So if you're going to recharge in Green Valley, you have to be on the southern side of Green Valley, not the northern side. And there is, basically it's the intersection of Pima Mine Road and Nogales Highway. There's a big recharge basin up there that's known as the Pima Mine Road Recharge Station. It is run by CAP in conjunction with Tucson Water. And that is used quite heavily, and that is where Tucson Water recharges part of their needs going north. I was talking earlier about the Project Renews and ground savings facility with Freeport, and then also CAP and the Pima Mine Road Recharge Basin. You may remember, actually it was 5 years ago, the town of Santa Rita rebuilt a bridge on Pima Mine Road over one of the major washes. There are 3 36-inch pipelines hanging underneath that bridge now, whereas previously there was only one 20-inch line serving the Pima Mine Road recharge station. Okay? In terms of what is the situation here, most private wells are less than 400 feet deep. But the two Hud Bay wells are both in excess of 1,200 feet deep. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're pumping water from 1,200 feet. What they do with those, the casing, so to speak, they put in screens. And that those screens may be down like 500 feet, 700 feet. So that's where the water comes from. It's not necessarily the bottom of the pump. Hud Bay and Augusta used to have a well protection permit. And that got canceled in 2019. So the question becomes, what's going to end up with those individuals? Hud Bay, in that Green Valley News article of June, indicated, well, we will get to that, but so be it. Anyways, the mine complex will require basically totally gone groundwater. The permits must be given. They're basically what's called must-issue permits. There can be a public hearing, and we can question it, but unless there's a major, there is one provision in the 1980 Groundwater Act, but the probability of it being coming to be or employed is minimal. And that is the state of Arizona can reject an extraction permit for water if it presents a major safety or other hazard to the community. But since we're sitting on such abundant amount of water, even though they want 9,000 acre feet, the probability of that being the finding is minimal. And again, there's no limitation on the amount of water that they can pump. But obviously, there's also, in addition, there's a court of public opinion. And I guess that's one of the things we're trying to employ here today. One of the other things, just for your information, this is a chart about gross domestic product in the state of Arizona, excuse me, in the US and in Tucson. And the financial services and other government agencies, they are a very significant percentage of the gross domestic product. You will see down at the bottom is mining. Mining is less than 2% of the gross domestic product in the state of Arizona. There is a current legal action that has been taken. HUD-Bay in May of 2021 filed a reclamation permit or reclamation plan with the state mine inspector, which they are required to do. And that state mine inspector approved that permit for May 2021. Then in early part of 2022, they submitted an amended plan. That amended plan substantially increased the amount of acreage involved. It surfaced the heap leach pad. It did not talk about the sulfuric acid operation, although they infer that by the fact of how they're going to process the sulfur. The state mine inspector, through his consultants, came back and said with that amended plan, there was no substantial difference. So he approved their amended reclamation plan. It is our feeling, and that is the process of the suit, that when there is in fact a significant change, and we feel there is, and we'll let the courts decide, okay, there needs to be a public hearing again. And the state mine inspector has not done that. So our suit is to have a public hearing associated with the revised reclamation plan. We'll keep you abreast of the details. Okay? And again, we are closely monitoring their purchase of state land. They want to acquire these 40 acres up here, which will extend their tailings situation, and they want to acquire 160 acres here, which will, quote, complete their left, complete their F. In other words, they don't have to, it'll give them the ability to make a left-hand turn or a right-hand turn, as the case may be. One of the things that is significant about both of these, and Robert's going to talk about it in a few minutes, sitting over here is Sycamore Canyon. The south end, basically the western side of Vail, not the city of Vail, but south of Houghton and Harrison Road. And you know, what's going to end up with them? And then again, the fact that they're going to have to reroute the access to the Embry's mine, which is this white area right in here. So what are the two things that you can do? One is correspond with the state mine inspector, demanding from your perspective as a private citizen that there in fact be a public hearing. Secondly, communicating with the state land department not to sell those 40 acres and 160 acres to HUD-Bay. Now, one of the things that happens with state land, and what our concern is if they sell that state land, what do you think is going to happen to the value of the state land that's adjacent to it? It's probably going to go down in value. So there's really a double, I won't call it a double dipping, but they're giving up the state land to begin with to Hudbay, and then even though the state charter requires them to maintain the maximum value associated with the state holdings, which are appreciable, by the way, in this state, that's not going to be the case. So, again, learn your participation today for awareness. Thank government individuals who have taken a stand. One of the organizations is the Pima County Board of Supervisors. It was on a 4-to-1 vote, by the way. And, you know, thank them and other government officials for their situation. Remind yourself about what's going on. So when you see an article or whatever it may be, you say, oh, yeah, I want to do something. Again, correspondence is much appreciated. If you wish to organize and establish a little subgroup somewhere or a committee, you are certainly welcome to do so. And join any organizations. Now, you don't have to join to say the Scenic Santa Ritas. There's the Center for Biological Diversity, which is opposed to the mine. There's the Sky Island Alliance, and there's a variety of other agencies. Anyways, with that, Save the Scenic Santa Ritas, our mailing address, which is over on Tanca Verde, and also our new telephone number. And basically, it's a voicemail system. So you can leave a message, indicate what you're interested in. If you would please give your name and repeat your number twice, so we're sure we get it correct. And that call will be returned. And there's also our email, which is info@Scenic Santa Ritas, not scenic, but scenicsanaritas.org, or the website. And you will notice on the website, for those in the back, you can't really see it, there is no word save in front of it. It's www.scenicsanaritas.org. And with that, that concludes my presentation. What I'd like to do, if we could, let Robert do his presentation on the renderings, and then we'll open it up to Q&A at that point, okay?
What I took upon myself to do was to try to visualize what it is that was being proposed. I write for the Patagonia Regional Times, and I was writing about the reconstitution of itself that Rosemont Copper has been through, that's been described by John. But my particular concern as an architect is what's going on in 3 dimensions. And what they generally present is extremely flat stuff made up of little lines with practically no terrain in it. So I decided to say, well, myself, what is this actually in 3-dimensional space that they're proposing? What's it going to look like? How's it going to affect the mountains? So I worked with fairly low-level views here as a kind of before picture, and all of you can orient toward the white limestone, which is relatively less toxic than the ore that will be moved by this proposal, by the way. What you see here is Santa Rita Road coming around, and another landmark some of you might know is Gunside Pass right up here in this very ridgy part of the mountains. But what I did is to take this from Hudbay's, or their investor proposal, tucked away in a far back corner, has a thing they call the exploration deck, which is a 3-dimensional view of the pits and the land ownership, but not the facilities. It's kind of fun to navigate around if you've ever flown in Google Earth. But that gave me a start on where the pits were. And then I brought that into a Google Earth view in a way that left the red lines still showing. And what I had to do is try to understand complex mountains and shapes. This is not just a wall of mountain range by any means. There's 1.5 miles, but you can see very clearly here, 1.5 miles with bumps. And the mine proposal comes up over the mountains from way over here and goes all the way to about here, which we'll get to. These red lines goes basically off this picture. So the elements that I was able to visualize using this method are the main pieces of the mine. I did this in June before the phase 1, phase 2 more tailings proposal came out. I was obsessed with the pits because of their depth, even though, as has been mentioned, they're shallower on this side. So this is one of them, right here. And I had to develop that that's going to replace Peach Knob, the Peach Elgin pit. So imagine the mountain turn upside down and turn into a pit. That's what's going on here. But I started really with the tailings on the F parcel, which you can kind of read, top bar of the F, middle, and slope here. In the shapes that I found in another one of their documents. Investors love to see pictures, but not of this sort. So the pictures that Hudbay has presented in their investor proposals tend to be of glittery deposits underground, kind of magic pictures, if you will. So I'm concerned with what would you actually see. In particular, the biggest dramatic element is the tailings that go about 3 miles, 3+ along the border, as has been mentioned, with the Santa Rita experimental range. There's this one gap of state land. Right beside it, the dark smudge, as you probably read it here, is my crude rendering of what the mill site is like. It's a very large manufacturing complex that they've separately detailed, but again, not shown us pictures of. So this is kind of odd. There's a gap of a mountain, another state land. This is really the main entrance here. I took the liberty of adding what I'm sure they'll do, which is a guardhouse, gateway, and kind of turnaround parking, some institutional stuff. Power substation, suggesting the power lines coming along what they casually call the utility corridor. There's a diagonal slice right through the 5,000-acre experimental farm. So what else I made assumptions about is where roads might go. This is the replacement of the Gunside Pass Road. Kind of a main artery shows up here, goes around the factory here, when in fact it may end up going diagonally through. But don't be too nitpicky about this. Second thing is another pit back here. This is the middle one. And then, as I kind of worked from front to back, visualizing this, I realized that what this proposal essentially is horizon modification. Because I was saying this is the edge of the big Rosemont pit after it starts to eat the horizon. Dashed line is the existing horizon. These green arrows were my attempt to say horizon is going down. Distances vary from nothing to about 350 feet. But I'm working with kind of coarse analog understanding from topo maps and stuff. And I didn't want to spend the rest of my life plotting points and saying, well, is it 285 feet or 315? So the distance, though, a modification of the horizon, I get as something over 1.5 miles from the beginning of the dashed line to the end. And I have another separate small map that some of you have seen that is actually labeled Horizon Modification Program. Horizon Modification Proposal, excuse me. Next slide. Yes. Tail end of the F parcel, you might remember, had a small fin going. That's the end of the west side comments. I was trying to explain the main elements. Switch around to the north, and that fin of property is a quarter section, and 2/3 of a section in an odd shape, wishbone or U or whatever you want to call it. But it's very much downplayed in the Rosemont Copper World publicity. It's even cut, if you might remember, the red squares, John, you were pointing to, they cut it off. They cut it off at the beginning of that because they don't want to get into the residential area. This is the high part of Corona de Tucson. It's a street in here called Ocotillo Rim, and this is Ocotillo Preserve subdivision. All this information comes off of Pima Maps, which is a mega layered trove or horror, depending on how you get along with it. But that's where the parcel lines come from. So, for example, there's a parcel. The next owner is Rosemont Copper.
Move on.
What this is physically is a huge drainage. The lines are from the flood control. This goes back to the whole west side of Mount Fagan. And I forget the cubic foot per minute, but you can find it out from the coding of the wash. It's on the order of something like 5,000 to 10,000 feet a minute. And when you're there on the ground, you can get to right here, and you can also walk in this wash. Conservation area down below. When you're on the ground, you can tell it's about 3 feet wide by 25 to 30 that common floods will do, and it has done more. That's a lot of gallonage moving fairly fast. And it gathers from other tributaries that have lesser flow. All that's known and mapped and available. But next, thank you for timing that, John. Probably won't make your 10 minutes. I need a little herding. Next, if you take that parcel shape, put it into Google Earth, and fly around to a viewpoint you're interested in, here's what you see of the first one and the other two. They're foreshortened here. So this is the long finger. It comes from the northeast corner of the end parcel. So we're looking south all the way to Wrightson here. And this little squiggle is the Gunside Pass Road now in use. So it's kind of a lineup from over the Helvetia Road, Dirt Road, the Limestone Quarry, and Gunside Pass. And this does not have horizon modification or anything else in it. What I'm attempting to do here is say, what about that north finger? What are the tailings like on that? Because I ferreted it out of their stuff. So this is what I've drawn as an indication just for the north finger, north tip I was calling it. But I'm most interested in how it blocks the wash. You can see the basin, that's the drainage. You can get a sense of the bowl at the west of Mount Fagan, which is off the picture here. There are so many knobs in here.
And also, just as a side note, Hudbay makes the comment that no storm water will leave their facility. It basically is contact water. Now, there may be some tributaries that they're going to have drainage, but anything that is on the mine plan of operation, the equipment area, they say they're going to be able to contain it. We'll see.
So what I was looking to show here is what happens if you have a 300-foot stack of tailings over lumpy ground. And you can see that it hops down into the washes a little bit. They have the practice of making a perimeter road, which we've now seen way down here. But remember, we're at the far north end, and nothing else shows of all of this area that would have development in it. So keep that in mind in looking at this. This is only a fraction of the tailings. The 3.5 quarter sections go about 1.5 miles from here to here, and then the crosswise width this way is 0.5 mile. So the two unequal arms of that parcel going, I'm going to make a bad gesture here.
One more up.
The F parcel, the F land, its corner is right here. And then the rest of the line goes down through here to the southwest corner of their stuff, comes up and back to Peach Knob, which disappears, and then the other development we were looking at is in through here. So the main attempt here is to show the relationship of, that's not even one of
This
my
is one
slides.
that I threw in.
Okay. The main attempt of the previous slide is to show the relationship of a mass of tailings with the residential area that's the southwest corner of the Corona de Tucson and the high land. This is kind of premium, Ocotillo Preserve is premium real estate. And there are spots in here when you can look, probably not with these tailings in place, you can look far southwest and see Palo Quibri, which is my main geographic regional reference point around here. I know where I am if I can see Palo. But this is a zone where it is in your backyard if you're one of these residents.
It is we have one more slide and then we'll go ahead and answer the questions, okay?
It's about this slide.
Go ahead.
It's about
So-
this side.
I'm looking at the dissection of the ground of this alluvial plain. It's to the right of the tailings that you imposed on here. And I'm looking at the catch basin to the left of the tailings. So do they have a plan for drainage of the water from that catch basin, which goes directly into our recharge basin?
Not that's been announced, but that they must be questioned about.
They're not required to come up with that?
By the time they get a floodplain use permit from FEMA, I would bet they do.
Okay.
I can speak further to that if there's questions. Yeah. 'Cause that's connected with the Santa Rita Experimental Range, which is my ranch, so I'll talk about that if there's questions.
Okay. If I may, just want to try to keep it simple, then we'll open it to Q&A. Just to give you a perspective, this is now looking to the northeast. This is assuming you are on the eastern side of the Santa Rita ridgeline, which basically runs right through here. That's the ridgeline. That's the original Rosemont pit, which they're calling the East Pit now. We talked about the fact that Broad Top and Butte are going to be on the western side. This is the Copper World pit, which is going to be on our side. And then here's the Peach Elgin, which are really two different pits. They're going to be on the western side of them. Gives you a little, I think, maybe a little better perspective. There's no tailings on this, but at least it gives you an idea, okay? And with that, unless there's anything else, yeah, Robert? Do you want to go back to one?
Here, I want to add a totally separate kind of note of appreciation to Steve for his mention of the people who have died here, because a second kind of mapping I'm involved is that of migrant deaths. I've been working with Alvaro and Cecil for about a year and a half to map the deaths using a source we have and go on some expeditions for planting crosses, memorializing the places migrants have died. So that's my somber response to what Steve had to say. It's worth memorializing.
The response, she's been very active and instrumental in stopping copper mines primarily on Native American lands. And I also sent that letter, a copy to Regina Romero, the mayor of Tucson, and Senator Mark Kelly. I've not received a response. I was just wondering if anybody with SSSR or Earth Justice has contacted Debbie Halen.
Not that we know of. We haven't contacted her, although we're in regular contact with Representative Grijalva, and also with the three sovereign nations of Native people. The Hopi, the Yaqui, and the Tohono O'odham are all partners with us on our efforts to stop the mine. So they're partnering with us on lawsuits that we file, and they also run, really wonderful thing is that they had an acknowledgement run through the area on the Arizona Trail that the Hudbay is trying to put into a mine. And the Native woman was blessed by the president of the Tohono O'odham Nation, and then she ran from Box Canyon all the way down through into Rosemont Valley being filmed, and that actually film was shot at the Tucson Film Festival. So we're working closely with the Native communities because they've been affected by this historically, and they're really concerned about this. I know one of the one of the things about all of these slides is to realize that this is not a done deal. Okay? We're saying this is what it could be, but it's not what it has to be if people write their letters and talk to their appointed and elected officials and simply ask for the laws to be enforced.
The last slide that you presented there with the rendering showing the tailings on that parcel at Sycamore Canyon, Corona de Tucson area. I think as a crow flies, you're about 2 miles from Copper Ridge Elementary School, which is about 400 students and then falls under the umbrella of Vail Unified School District. Can you comment on any strategies you may have?
Sure. And are there folks here who came over for this presentation from Corona de Tucson? If you're from Corona de Tucson, this was particularly concern you because that next to last slide that Robert showed actually comes right down next to Alcatia Farms and Corona de Tucson, where you can stand on one bank of Sycamore Canyon and say, okay, this is nice, beautiful potential residential property. Look across Sycamore Canyon, 100 yards is the land that Hudbay wants to acquire, and if they do, they can put their tailings there, as it was shown in Robert's slide there. So I think real important for Corona de Tucson and Vail to work together with Sarita, Green Valley, Quail Creek, because even though it seems like it's over there, when the camel gets its nose in the tent, it won't be long before the camel's whole body is in the tent, and you know what that does. So thanks for asking the question, sir.
Does that represent, what point in time would this be if it went?
That would be after the first section of the plan. It's a 44-year plan, and they're divided into initial section. That's what they're going to be doing in the initial section. Then, if they do continue, which we're working really hard to see that they don't, then that will actually increase, and that slag pile that you see there, if you see the little red line on the side, that will extend down, and that's what he was talking about as sort of the 2030, 14 years. 2036. Right, sir.
Are there any crucial points or deadlines for getting our voices heard?
Right, like now. The most important thing right now is a critical time because we have some newly elected officials coming into office. We have the state mine inspector who we have filed suit to get them to have a public hearing around the reclamation plan. We are hoping that what they'll do is simply say, okay, we'll have your public hearing. We don't want to go through the court system. That would be great if they would just schedule a public hearing so that we can all come out and be heard. If not, we're going to continue with the lawsuit. So if you can contact the state mine inspector and the state land office to urge them not to sell your land, right? That's public land to Hudbay.
Of everything, because at the beginning of your presentation, which was wonderful, by the way, and thank you for doing, you showed that some years ago the judge ruled against the project.
Right.
That was upheld, I think, in May.
Right.
So it seems like it's dead.
No, that was the project on the eastern side. That was the old Rosemont he ruled against.
Okay.
And then as a result of that, that's when they put the two of them together.
Okay.
And have now come out with this.
Okay, so this is a new project.
It basically took the old Rosemont project and turned it upside down.
And so
And brought it over here on our side.
So they're proposing that, and they're going to go through the same kind of approval process for this.
Well, that's the challenge. Is what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, we have some selected permits for the Rosemont site, right? Some of the things they wanted to do were overturned by the court, but some of the permits that they got were state permits. And what they're trying to say is, those state permits that we got over on the east side, we can use those same ones on the west side. we'll just say, it's just a little bigger. But in fact, it's much bigger, and so that's what we're challenging. And what they're hoping will happen, and we're working to prevent, is they're hoping to be able to come over on the west side.
If they're unable to purchase any additional state or private land on the west side, the picture that you presented, what it would look like with the tailings, how much of that would be reality if they were not able to purchase any more land on the west side?
The picture that we showed on the initial thing, they'll be able to do that whether they purchase that state land or not. The second thing that he showed, they will probably have to get a hold of some of that state land because they only have a single point of contact at the corner of the F. And Robert, wanted to just say one more thing on that?
Not to that point, but that's the trick. If you have point to point of two rectangles basically, and there's no flow through it. That's why those two pieces that were circled are both important in that map.
So they would feel that they have the permission in Hudbay to dump tailings on the west side in those areas, right? They're building the roads, they're drilling the posts, they're moving ahead as if nothing's stopping them. Right. Is that what's going on right now on the west side?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And the only thing that would stop them would be an environmental impact or water quality issue. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't understand why.
Several areas are potentially holding them up. But with regard to mining, it's that if we don't get extractive capitalism out of our value system altogether and substitute it with an entirely different relationship to nature based on profound knowledge of living systems, then we continue deeper into the sixth mass extinction which we have now begun.
The bottom line is, in the worst case, have an environmentally friendly mine, which communicates and works with the community. In the best case, not to have a mine at all.
Also, so thank you all for being here. Please, if you've not signed in, please sign in. Let's give these guys a big hand.